The letter came folded into thirds, slid under my door like a threat in a cheap movie. No stamp, no envelope, just HOA letterhead and the smell of toner. You are hereby ordered to remove the wheelchair ramp immediately. The structure is unapproved and violates community aesthetic standards. That was the line that made my pulse tick up, not the unapproved part, not even the violates standards. No, it was that word immediately. Because the ramp in question wasn't a deck or a shed or a basketball hoop on the curb. It was the aluminum slope that let my wife Claire roll from our front door to the driveway without lifting her wheelchair over concrete steps. I set the paper down on the kitchen counter. Claire was in the living room, framed by the morning light through the blinds, pouring her attention into a crossword. The hum of her chair's motor filled the silence when she shifted. "Another demand?" she asked without looking up. "They want the ramp gone," I said. Her pen stopped mid-square. She looked at me, calm, steady. "So they want me crawling?" I folded the letter back up, crisp as when it slid under the door. "They want a fight." The cold open was clear, an HOA willing to strip a disabled woman's access for the sake of aesthetics. They thought they were pushing a quiet couple into compliance. What they didn't know was that they'd just picked a public battle with a state senator who read bylaws the way surgeons read scans, line by line, cut by cut. Still, I didn't react loud. That's not my way. Instead, I set the letter on my desk and opened the governing documents binder. Section 8.3, Accessibility Accommodations, written plain as day. No restriction shall prohibit or impede modifications required by disability law or accessibility standards under the ADA. So the ramp wasn't unapproved. It was untouchable. Federal law trumped neighborhood preference, and the HOA had just put their ignorance in writing. The next day, the escalation began. The HOA president, Carol, silver bob, sharp blazer, voice like sandpaper, stood at the edge of my driveway when I pulled in from the Capitol. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just tapped her clipboard like a metronome. "Senator Davis," she said, drawing out the title as if mocking it. "Your ramp has until Friday." "It has as long as my wife needs it," I said, stepping past her. The gravel crunched under my shoes. "Rules are rules," she snapped. I unlocked the door, held it wide enough for her to see Claire roll forward, the chair humming steady as an engine. "And rights," I said, "are rights." Carol's jaw tightened. The war was now public. That night, we heard it. The hiss of a spray can. I flipped on the porch light just as a shadow darted across the cul-de-sac. The ramp glistened under the bulb, now streaked with a line of red paint. Graffiti. Sloppy, childish, but meant as a warning. Claire's hand found mine. "Don't rise to it," she whispered. I squeezed back. "I won't. I'll build a case." So I set the first camera. A discreet ring unit angled at the ramp. Then another tucked near the garage. The game had shifted into evidence gathering, and evidence, unlike insults, doesn't fade. Emails started landing in my inbox. Compliance reminders, unsigned, but clearly HOA boilerplate. Each one copied and saved, each one time-stamped. The red paint photos filed alongside them. By Wednesday, I had a folder labeled Ramp Harassment that could have been mistaken for a litigation exhibit. And still, I stayed quiet in public. At the next HOA meeting, I sat in the back. Carol clicked through slides about landscaping violations and mailbox paint colors, all while stealing glances at me. She thought I was isolated. She thought I was passive. But what she didn't see was the legal pad in my lap, filled with citations. ADA Title III, FHA Section 804, State Accessibility Statutes. She was cornering herself, and I wasn't about to interrupt. Sometimes the best trap is silence. On Thursday night, the second strike came. I was in the study when I heard the clatter, metal on concrete. I rushed outside. The ramp had been shifted, one side knocked loose from its bolts. Not destroyed, not gone. Just enough to make it unsafe. The camera caught the culprit clear. A man in khakis and a tucked-in polo, HOA treasurer Gary, fumbling with tools like a burglar on borrowed time. Chain of custody. Secured. Video backed up to the cloud. File renamed Tampering 0914. By the time Friday morning rolled around, I wasn't dreading Carol's deadline. I was waiting for her to trip into her own paperwork. And she did. Right on schedule. At 9:00 a.m., a fresh letter appeared in my mailbox. This one bolder, thicker font. Final notice. Ramp removal. Required by HOA authority. Non-compliance will result in fines, liens, and legal action. I slid the page into a plastic sleeve. Then I slid that sleeve into a binder marked Exhibits A through Z. Because here's the thing. When you play chicken with a senator who writes half the consumer protection bills in your state, you don't get away with sloppy threats. You get buried in them. That afternoon, I made my first call to an ADA attorney in my network, a former DOJ litigator who'd once dismantled a city zoning ordinance for less. She didn't need convincing. She just needed the evidence. I sent her the file folder. Within the hour, she called back with a dry laugh. They just handed you a federal case. Exactly. The ramp stayed, the cameras stayed, and my patience stayed too, because I knew what was coming, a showdown that would flip the HOA's own arrogance into a weapon against them. And when it happened, it wouldn't just protect my wife. It would set a precedent in the neighborhood that no clipboard and no midnight spray can could erase. For now, I kept my routine. Coffee at 6, legislative session at 9, letters filed at night, calm, methodical, waiting for the next step. Because in fights like this, patience isn't weakness. It's the fuse. The fuse burned faster than I expected. By the weekend, the HOA had shifted tactics. They stopped with the spray paint and sabotage and switched to paper bullets, violation notices stuffed under the doormat, anonymous flyers about property values slid into neighbors' mailboxes. Even a poorly photoshopped image of our home circulated on the HOA Facebook group with the ramp erased, like my wife's chair, and her dignity could be cropped out of existence. I didn't respond. I documented. Each flyer went into a clear evidence sleeve. Each Facebook screenshot into a folder with a timestamp and metadata download. Neighbors who forwarded me emails got added to the witness list. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was building a prosecutorial file. The breaking point came on Sunday. Claire wheeled out to get the paper, sunlight sharp on the driveway. I was pouring coffee when I heard her call, "Mark!" I stepped outside. The ramp was covered, literally, by a bright orange violation sticker. Adhesive thick, letters screaming, "Unauthorized structure, remove immediately." Claire sat in her chair, staring at it like a bad joke. "They tagged me like an abandoned car," she said flatly. I peeled the sticker off, adhesive ripping like Velcro. The residue clung to my palm. That sound, that rip, was the last piece I needed. This wasn't just harassment. It was a coordinated effort to intimidate a disabled resident. The file was ready to move from collection to action. But before going nuclear, I wanted airtight corroboration, so I called in allies. First, a private surveyor I trusted, someone who could mark out with GPS precision that our ramp sat entirely within property lines, not an inch over the HOA's jurisdiction. He brought plat maps, survey pins, and a digital scanner. The data was crystal clear. The ramp was legally untouchable. Second, a county deputy I knew from oversight hearings. He agreed to a courtesy visit, not enforcement yet, but enough to walk the property, note the vandalism, and log an official incident report. His body cam captured me holding the graffiti photo and pointing out the bolt tampering. Chain of custody. Confirmed. Third, an ADA compliance officer from the state. A quick email with attachments, and she slotted me into her Monday schedule for an on-site evaluation. Her specialty? Identifying systemic accessibility violations and writing reports that agencies love to read. Piece by piece, the case stopped being personal and started being procedural. And procedural is where I win. Monday morning, the trap sprang. The ADA officer arrived at 9 sharp, clipboard in hand, badge clipped to her belt. As luck, or fate, would have it, Carol was already on my driveway, arms crossed, tapping that same clipboard she'd carried before. Carol sneered when she saw the officer. "Oh, you called backup?" The officer didn't flinch. "Actually, ma'am, he did. Under state disability access law, I'm here to ensure compliance." Carol's smugness drained like colour from a photo. She tried to interrupt, but the officer went methodically down her checklist. Ramp slope, surface texture, clearance width. She even took out a digital inclinometer, pressed it to the ramp, and read aloud. Compliant. Perfectly within ADA gradient standards. I almost felt bad for Carol. Almost. Because the officer wasn't just inspecting the ramp, she was narrating it, recording for her report, every word logged as evidence. When she wrapped up, she turned to me. "Senator, you've done everything by the book. Any attempt to obstruct this accommodation would constitute a federal violation." Carol looked like she'd swallowed gravel. That night, the HOA doubled down. My inbox lit up with a new PDF, this time labeled Emergency Special Assessment. They wanted to fine me $500 a day until the ramp was removed. They attached bylaws. I read them. They'd quoted Section 5.2 about unapproved exterior alterations. But they'd conveniently left out Section 8.3, the accessibility clause I'd already highlighted. It was a textbook cherry pick, and worse, their PDF metadata showed Carol herself had authored the notice at 11:47 p.m., past curfew, on a Sunday, without a board vote. I smiled when I saw that timestamp. It was the kind of detail judges love, so I did what I always do. I responded with calm precision. Dear HOA Board, pursuant to ADA Title III, FHA Section 804, and HOA Bylaw 8.3, your demand constitutes unlawful discrimination. Further correspondence should be directed to my attorney. Attached, please find incident reports, survey documents, and compliance officer findings. Regards, Mark Davis. I hit send. The silence afterward was louder than any spray can. But the HOA wasn't finished. Not yet. On Wednesday, I caught Gary again. This time on camera, standing in the cul-de-sac, snapping photos of Claire as she maneuvered onto the ramp. The angle was invasive, practically surveillance. I walked out, calm, hands in my pockets. "Gary, you might want to delete those." He blinked, sweaty and nervous. "It's for the record." "Chain of custody works both ways," I said, nodding to the Ring camera blinking red above us. He looked up, saw the light, and turned pale. Then he shuffled off without a word. Evidence, handed to me by the people who thought they were collecting it. By now, the narrative was clear. HOA arrogance had escalated from paint cans to tampering to outright stalking, and every move they made tightened the noose. The stage was set for the public showdown. The meeting agenda already listed discussion of accessibility structures for Thursday night. I sharpened my notes, printed copies of statutes, bound a packet of exhibits, and I brought a single clean photo of Claire on the ramp, smiling in the sun, crossword book on her lap. Because sometimes the most powerful exhibit isn't a statute. It's a face. The community centre smelled of fresh paint and folding chairs, HOA theatre at its finest. The Thursday night meeting was already standing room only when I walked in. Neighbours leaned against walls, arms crossed, waiting for fireworks. Some came for gossip. Others came because they'd read the flyers and wanted to see if the ramp scandal was real. I didn't sit in the back this time. I walked straight to the front row, binder under my arm, evidence neat as a prosecutor's exhibit. Claire came too, rolling up beside me, wheels whispering over tile. Her presence shifted the whole room. Conversations dulled to a hush. Carol opened the meeting with her usual bark. First item of business: unauthorized structures, specifically the Davis property ramp. She said it loud, as if announcing a guilty verdict. I didn't flinch. Instead, I slid a packet down the table to the secretary. Copies for the board, 3-hole punched, tabs marking statutes, exhibits, and incident reports. Before you continue, I said, calm but firm, you'll want these. The board members flipped through the binders, their faces tightening with each page. Graffiti photos, tampering footage, survey data, the ADA officer's report stamped with the state seal, and finally a printout of Carol's midnight PDF, metadata circled in red. Neighbors leaned in to peek. Whispers spread like brushfire. Carol tried to keep her footing. This is irrelevant. The HOA has authority. No, I cut in. My voice stayed low, but it carried. The HOA has boundaries, and you've crossed every one. I rose slowly, facing the room. The fluorescent lights buzzed above. My words came measured, like testimony. Federal law requires reasonable accommodation for accessibility. Section 8.3 of our bylaws codifies that. Yet this board, I paused, eyes on Carol, chose to harass, vandalize, and intimidate a disabled resident. My wife, in her own home. Claire lifted her hand in a small wave, dry humor in her smile. Hi, everyone. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in murmurs of recognition. Neighbors who'd stayed quiet were suddenly seeing the story whole. Gary shifted in his seat, sweat darkening his collar. We were just enforcing standards, he stammered. I dropped the trump card. A USB drive, small enough to lose but heavy enough to crush a defense. Bodycam footage, I said, courtesy of the county deputy, plus ring captures. Every act of tampering and intimidation logged with timestamps. Gasps. Heads turned toward Gary. His wife buried her face in her hands. Carol's voice cracked. You can't just... Yes, I said, I can, and I will. I slid a final sheet onto the projector. A letterhead from my attorney. Large font. Notice of intent to file civil action. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. The board scrambled. Carol tried to motion for adjournment, but another member, normally silent, raised his hand. I move, he said carefully, that we dismiss all actions against the Davis property, reimburse damages, and censure the president for conduct unbecoming. A stunned pause, then a second voice. I second. The vote was lopsided. Neighbors raised hands. The secretary tallied with a shaking pen. Motio. N passed. Carol's face blanched. For once, her clipboard hung limp at her side. But I wasn't finished. Reimbursement, I said evenly, is a start. But make no mistake, this isn't just an internal slap on the wrist. My attorney will proceed. Civil damages, federal complaint. You tried to turn a ramp into a weapon. Now it's evidence. I turned to the crowd, eyes scanning faces. This is what happens when power is abused. HOA boards are meant to maintain community, not strip rights. If it can happen to my wife, it can happen to any of you. Silence settled. Not fear. Clarity. The twist came 3 weeks later. The HOA's insurance carrier got wind of the impending lawsuit, and just like that, premiums skyrocketed, coverage threatened. Residents weren't angry at me anymore. They were angry at Carol. Mailboxes filled with demands for her resignation. Someone even taped a sign to her door. A ramp isn't a crime. Leadership abuse is. She stepped down under pressure. Gary followed. The HOA board reshuffled, bylaws amended to explicitly strengthen accessibility protections. The ramp? It stayed, polished clean, new anti-slip strips installed courtesy of a community improvement fund the board hastily approved. Neighbors who once looked away now offered to help shovel snow from it in winter. The epilogue was quiet. One evening, Claire rolled onto the ramp at sunset, crossword in her lap. I sat beside her, binder finally closed. The air smelled of cut grass, not hostility. She looked at me, amused. "So the ramp took down the HOA president?" I chuckled. "No, her arrogance did. The ramp just made it visible." That's the lesson, really. Boundaries matter. Property rights aren't just lines on a plat map. They're human dignity, spelled in bolts and slopes and crosswords on a porch. Abuse them, and the law will catch up. If you've faced HOA harassment, drop your story below, and if you believe in standing your ground with facts and patience, hit subscribe, because the next fight is always around the corner.